April 9, 1948. Press wires carry this story. 2 witnesses near Belvidere, Illinois, claimed to see a bird bigger than an airplane. It had a long neck and feet trailing behind it, one said, calling it a monster. The other described it as prehistoric. The next day, a retired Air Force colonel backed this up with a sighting of his own 300 miles to the south. He judged what he saw, described as definitely a bird, to be the size of a small pursuit plane, 3 times that of the largest living bird. We cover strange declassified files. Subscribe to join us. The original, unedited version of the story. Colonel Walter Sigmund was horseback riding north of Alton, Illinois, when he saw 2 Army planes fly above him to the northeast. Sigmund next sees what he thinks is a pursuit craft at 5,000 feet follow them. But it wasn't a craft. From movements of the object and its size, he said, I figured it could only be a bird of tremendous size. It was definitely a bird, not a glider or jet plane, he added. Sigmund had experience identifying aircraft. He was previously head of the Army Air Base in Kearns, Utah. In World War II, personnel at that location trained fighter pilots and bomber crews. Interestingly, later versions of the story, when it was reprinted elsewhere, omitted the section on the Army plane spotted near the bird. But left in the account was perhaps the most remarkable part. Sigmund estimated it to be the size of a small pursuit plane. We can analyze this further. The 4 pursuit fighters in Army Air Force hangars at that time were the P-39 Airacobra, P-40 Warhawk, P-47 Thunderbolt, and P-51 Mustang, all wingspans ranging between 34 and 42 feet. This is significantly larger than the largest bird, the wandering albatross, whose max wingspan is 12 feet, and more than the largest ever bird discovered, P. sandersi, whose 24-foot wingspan allowed it to fly above what is now South Carolina 25 million years ago. The only creatures ever on par with World War II fighters were flying reptiles, like Hatzgopteryx and Quetzalcoatlus, which maxed out at 36 feet, way back in the Cretaceous, 80 million years ago. Of all places, Project Blue Book, the U.S. Air Force's study of unidentified flying objects, had a small case file on this. The conclusion? There is nothing of astronomical character in this incident. If one considers Colonel Sigmund's statements apart from the considerably less reliable other observers, it would seem the object may really have been a bird. The rabbit hole can end here. Maybe the colonel was simply confused about the size of the bird and it was smaller. Maybe the other witnesses, including a 12-year-old who saw a bird, quote, bigger than an airplane flap its wings in a St. Louis suburb that year, were wrong too. It's notoriously difficult for untrained observers to judge the size of something 5,000 feet in the air. Excluding those, we have no corroboration of Sigmund from anyone else trained. But what if their estimates of size were correct? Are there any more leads? 1673, Jesuit missionary Jacques Marquette is exploring cliffs on the Mississippi River near modern-day Alton. 600 years earlier, the area had been the heart of Cahokian territory, the largest prehistoric city north of Mexico. Marquette stumbles on this, a mural of the Piasa Bird, a bird-like dragon with scales, wings, and horns. The painting was badly degraded. It was said locals would fire weapons at it when they passed. Tribes throughout the Great Plains have long told stories of thunderbirds, mythological birds so large they created thunder with each flap of their wings. The Algonquin of modern-day Michigan described them looking like an X, with a head facing forward. Menominee of Wisconsin told stories of a mountain in the sky where they lived. Perhaps most unique is Great Plains Lakota mythology. That describes thunderbirds or thunder beings who destroyed a serpent that tried to flood North America. These stories even stretch to Alaska, where a thunderbird legend describes it as big enough to carry a whale. In 1925, indigenous people of the Aleutian Islands described U.S. Army biplanes as Thunderbirds and celebrated when they saw them. So, what could the colonel have seen? Was it in any way connected to a depiction made in the same area half a millennium earlier? And why didn't Blue Book make note of the two army planes he saw flying in the same direction as the bird? Perhaps the most compelling reason to keep an open mind is simply that human understanding of prehistoric birds may be incomplete. There's only one known fossil of P. sandersii, for example, uncovered in South Carolina in the 80s. Techniques used to estimate a 24-foot wingspan have been called conservative by some paleontologists. Still, it's difficult to understand how a prehistoric bird could have survived to today. North America's climate is vastly different than it was in the Cretaceous, and the atmosphere today has 1/4 the carbon dioxide content as back then. Reports of large birds in Illinois have continued, most notably in 1977 in Lawndale, Illinois, and in 2018 in St. Charles. What do you think? How compelling is this sighting? And should reports like this be swept up in UFO files or not? Let us know in the comments. And special thanks to our patrons, including A Filthy Lot. If you like what we do, consider joining them on Patreon and help us produce one new episode a week. Most of our traffic comes from external shares, so if you have any family or friends interested, we'd appreciate it if you ask them to subscribe. See you next time.